Okay, so welcome back for our last day together this time around. And we're going to talk about the final element of the Eightfold Path, which is holistic concentration. So, this element of the path is about both meditation and practice, and it's primarily in the arena of our attention. So, if you think about it, every single thing we experience is experienced through our attention. I mean, it's kind of by definition. If we aren't paying attention to something, it doesn't enter our experience. So this is literally the place where every single part of our experience comes. And how we pay attention affects how we experience the world. So training our attentional skills is an incredibly valuable thing to engage with. And in a way, it precedes everything else. It's completely foundational to everything because this is how we experience everything. Also, our ability to pay attention turns out to be pivotal in our happiness. So there's this fabulous study done in 2020. I won't tell you the title yet because we'll get there. But the title gives it all away. But basically, they gave some massive sample of people a kind of combo smartphone pager thing. And basically, they tracked them for some period of time. And every time they got a little ping, they had to answer 3 questions. What are you doing? Are you paying attention to what you're doing? And how happy are you? And basically, they got all of this data together. And the first thing they found out, what do you think the percentage of time we're paying attention is throughout the day? What's your guess? Since there's only 2 of you live today so far. What do you think?
30%?
I was going to say 50%.
50% is actually right. It's about half. Yeah.
I'm 30.
That was a low estimate. But so, okay, basically, the thing is, people are only paying attention. We're only paying attention about half the time. And it turns out that paying attention is correlated to being happy. The study was called A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. So, why is a wandering mind an unhappy mind? It's because the mind tends to wander into what I'd call dark places. So our mind tends to rehash old difficulties or replay scenes of future potential disasters. And if we can train ourselves to catch these habits and reorient the mind towards something in the present moment, we'll feel more happy and at ease. So that's a lot of what this training is actually about. And what I'm not suggesting is that it's always bad to consider the past or the future. That would be completely ridiculous. Hi, Annie. So sometimes we should sit down and consider something that happened in the past or plan for the future. And those are fantastic things to do. And I highly recommend doing them when you want to. Okay. But the difference is doing them intentionally with purpose or just cycling habitually through repetitive stressful thoughts and feelings relatively unconsciously. And that never leads to any sort of resolution or improvement because it's just kind of background habit, just saying the same things over and over and over in our mind. Andrew Holacek writes, the untrained mind sticks to everything. So in training in our attention, we can train to drop thought patterns that aren't helpful and reorient the mind towards something positive or at least neutral. Plus, think about it. If our minds are wandering half the time, think of how much harder it is to get anything done and to get it done well. And there are times when paying attention is actually meaningful and important, like listening to a friend talk about something difficult, right? So I think we've all been there on either side where we're either the speaker or the listener when the other person can't pay attention. And that's pretty frustrating when it's something that really, we need attention about something. And then it's really hard to actually be, try to be there for somebody and try to be compassionate, and you're totally distracted by 8,000 things. So that's a bummer too. So we want to be able to do what we intend to do and to be helpful to others and to enjoy our lives. And that takes a certain amount of training, I think, in attention. I also think that training in attention has become more important recently with the advent of technology. So I personally know that I have a shorter attention span for things in the last few years than I did 10 years ago. And I'm not alone in this. So the average human attention span has fallen apparently from 12 seconds in 2000, around the time that smartphones became widely used, to 8 seconds today. So from 12 seconds to 8 seconds, that's a huge change. In comparison, scientists believe that a goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. So we have dropped our own attention spans shorter than that of a goldfish. I mean, these things aren't the easiest thing to study, but that's the argument, and it's currently thought. So the practice we can engage in to train our attention is called concentration. The Tibetans call this shamatha, which means calm abiding. And if you're interested in training this, on my website, there is a course called Calming the Mind, and that's why it's from this word calm abiding. So in Pali, the word is jhana. In Sanskrit, it's dhyana, one of the limbs, 8 limbs. It's cha'an in Chinese. And the reason I'm going through this is I think it's interesting. It became Zen in Japanese. So the word Zen means concentration, even though that's not their primary technique. They do open awareness generally, or koan practice, but that's where the word Zen came from. So I imagine that concentration is what most people picture when they think of meditation. Stabilizing the mind on an object. And if you've ever done a bunch of mantra practice, that's what that's stabilizing the mind on a mantra is a concentration practice. There's Kelly. So the main difference in technique from mindfulness practice to concentration practice is that in concentration practice, if something compelling arises in our experience, like a bodily sensation or a mental state, we don't investigate. Instead, we stay on our chosen object. So concentration practice, it's just the object, only the object. Obviously, other things happen, but when they happen, we try to go back to the object or to stay on the object the whole time. So in this sense, concentration practice is the ultimate mind training. And traditionally, it was used to make the mind, or is used to make the mind serviceable, useful for what are called insight practices, which you might have heard of as like deconstructive practices. These are advanced meditation practices designed to sort of fast track our development in a very specific direction. And if the mind isn't stable and calm, you're not going to get much out of those insight practices. In fact, you just sit there and kind of think about them and then they're pointless. So it's sort of like you need a baseline level of being able to put the mind in one place, keep it there and not have thoughts. And then when you get there, then you would start doing these insight practices traditionally, which is normally done in a retreat setting, because getting the mind completely stable is very hard to do in daily life. And that's why part of why people, become monastics or go on retreats, is if they want to do these insight practices. I'm not saying there aren't ones that you couldn't do on a daily basis, but the kind of traditional Buddhist ones, you would do them in a retreat first to kind of get the taste, and then you might do them in daily life after that, when you kind of know what the practice is for already. So, and if you're interested in that, we can talk about that after the course. I also do have one of those courses on my website, but it's not one that requires concentration. That's in the yogic tradition. Anyway, yogic insight, we can talk about that if you're interested. But I recommend, if you do insight practices, having a friend to talk to as you do it, so you don't kind of go off in the wrong direction. So that's just my little insight plug. Okay. So on the way to finding a stable mind. Concentration practice reveals our mental difficulties. So this is kind of one of the interesting things about concentration. And we learn to face them head on. So Trungpa Rinpoche once said that meditation is one insult after another. And while that is true of mindfulness practice, I think it's particularly true of concentration practice, because you go to put your mind in one place and what happens? It goes everywhere else, right? So, and you already know that from mindfulness. So, but that becomes more true when you're trying harder and putting the mind in a smaller arena. So in mindfulness practice, your mind has a pretty big arena, anything that's happening in the present moment. Whereas in concentration, it's just the object that you've chosen or been taught. So in their book, Practicing the Jhanas, again, practicing concentration, Stephen Snyder and Tina Rasmussen explain, when we attempt to focus awareness on a particular object, one of the first things to happen is we can't do it. The mind keeps grasping to other things, thoughts of the past or future, distractions in our environment, such as sounds or physical discomfort, and so on. These difficulties are called hindrances, and that's the traditional term for them. So they say that undertaking this process is useful because the same hindrances that occur when we're meditating also occur in our everyday lives and ultimately cause us to suffer. They say the genius of the shamatha portion, concentration portion of the Buddhist path, is that it builds our capacity to focus awareness rather than allowing our awareness to be continually distracted and prone to the causes of suffering. So, through trying to place our mind in one place, we learn where we run into difficulty, and these areas are highlighted. So that's helpful. And obviously, we got plenty of that in mindfulness practice, but it's even more highlighted here. And here we actually try to surmount our obstacles, like get over them rather than just getting to know them. In mindfulness practice, we're getting to know them. Here we are trying to get past them. So it can be pretty interesting. What else is concentration practice good for? So it helps to train the attention and shows us where we go wrong. But it also shows us basically the positive aspects of our mind that are unavailable when we're stuck in the daily routine of cognitive fusion. So I just love this, that your mind is actually a positive phenomenon. And that's, without doing this practice, that's very hard to know. I'm not saying it's impossible to know, but it comes up very clearly here. So the Dalai Lama explains the mind is an affirmative phenomenon, but on the ordinary level, it's obscured by concepts, different states of thinking and preconceptions, and so on. He says, in order to recognize the essential nature of the mind, therefore, we have to peel off these different layers and clear away these obscurations. Then we shall see the true face of our own minds. So when you hear in Buddhism about the nature of your mind, I think people, when I first heard that, I was like, well, the nature of my mind must be how it is moment to moment. So it's distracted and it's, gets mad and then it's okay and whatever. But that's not considered the nature of your mind. That's sort of the overlay of habits. So when we get to the nature of the mind, it's like, what is the mind like underneath? And this is everyone's nature. So what is the true nature of our mind? If you remember that exercise we did maybe a couple of weeks ago about what is here if nothing needs fixing, what did we experience when we did that? We had reports of spaciousness, peace, love, and a kind of like fullness. So the nature of our mind has to be something we can actually feel. It can't be something that we don't have access to because it's our nature. So it can't be, if you sort of think about it being something that's not here right now, that can't be it. But this peace and spaciousness and love is actually underlying everything we go through all the time. And you have to practice to believe that. I think being told that, like everything in this course, don't take my word for it, look to see through these practices if that makes sense and appears to be true to you. Because this is an amazing thing to actually realize. And I think it's very sort of grounding and humbling, and gains for me a kind of confidence in my own moving through the world, that the nature of my mind is actually peace and kindness. So that exercise of what's here if nothing needs fixing was designed to drop us momentarily into that experience. That's what that practice was for. Concentration practice is designed to drop us into that experience and leave us there. And the more you do it, if you train in it, they want you to be able to be there as long as you want to. And that's doable. But again, probably not in day-to-day life. So, interestingly, when we drop our mind into its nature, the mind is completely satisfied. We are completely satisfied. We don't want anything to be different from how it is. There's just no sense of that at all. It's total contentment, total satisfaction. Nothing's missing. We feel whole. We feel fully connected. So to me, it turns out, I think, that what we're searching for in the outside world happens to be our own underlying self. Like we're made of what we're looking for, which means it's accessible, just not from other people and experiences, because they've all got their own stuff going on and the world has a bunch of stuff going on. So if we want true deep satisfaction, we sort of have to find it as our nature and then express it through our lives. And that of course will bring more harmony into our world, but it's not going to make things all go the way we want to, or people always act the way we want to, or anything, because that's just not going to happen. It's just too many moving parts for that, and too many opinions on how things should be. I mean, it just doesn't work with the numbers. So Bhante Gunaratana says, when we have experienced how the mind really is, underneath all the mental junk we carry, we can begin to bring pieces of that luminous calm back into our daily lives. Those pieces allow us to carry further the work of undermining the habits we want to remove. This allows deeper concentration, which allows more bliss to seep into our lives. This in turn allows deeper understanding of the habits, which then weakens them further. And so it goes. He says it's an upward spiral into peace and joy and wisdom. So that's his plug for concentration. And I mean, it's true. If you spend, half an hour a day blissed out, you are going to bring some of that into the rest of your life. And some of that stability can help with the mindfulness, kind of being mindful through the rest of the day. But what I'm not saying here is that the peace experienced in concentration practice is somehow permanent. It's completely and totally temporary during the time that we're doing the practice. So I'm also not saying that any individual experience is the goal. And this is very important because we are experience oriented. So having an experience of stopping your mind is not the goal of anything. It's very interesting. And the skills gained along the way could be helpful. But no state is what we're going for. And I like the phrase, we're not looking for altered states, we're looking for altered traits. And the reason I say that is that we think we're supposed to, we just sort of untrained, average folks coming to meditation think I'm just supposed to stop my thoughts. And if you do that, it'll be pleasant. But that's not the point, because that's temporary. What's really interesting is what we've been talking about for 6 weeks now, which is looking at our habits, looking at our reactivity, and finding ways to be more loving and caring and harmonious, and conscious and clear and skillful. That's what's going to improve our lives, not intermittent sessions of bliss, which are still nice. But the problem is that a lot of folks get addicted to the bliss of concentration. And I can speak from experience that I spent a couple of years there. It was lovely, but I don't really know what else was happening, because I was kind of too high, honestly. to engage super skillfully in my world. So, and then even worse than that, is getting stuck there thinking that that's nirvana. And that's not nirvana. It is temporary cessation of suffering, but it is not going to, like, it's not the same as realizing, naming an emotion that you're stuck in, and, being able to kind of work through it. There's like the Buddhists think that the yogis only do concentration, and that's not true. But if it were true, what the Buddhists tend to say about yogis is like they go sit in a cave for 35 years and they stop their mind and grow some really long beard. And then the guy like wakes up from his, long months of concentration, and there's some rats nesting in his beard, and he like, I don't know, gets mad and chases them away or kills them or something. Like he hasn't gained any compassion in that time. So that's a sort of Buddhist story criticizing the yogis, because nobody knows what anyone's doing in a different tradition. So never believe one tradition about another tradition, because they just have no idea. But those are the stories I was told. And that's just, but it's just a comment on concentration, that it's not enough. Taking time out from a problem is nice, but it's not the same thing as solving the problem. And yet there's these underlying skills that are super helpful. So we've already discussed that nirvana is the space that exists when we're not caught in the reactivity of greed, hatred, and delusion. And as I said, the bliss of concentration is not characterized by greed, hatred, and delusion, but freedom, which is the point of practice, is the ability to relate to all experience with clarity, calm, and presence, free from fear. It's greeting what's arising with wisdom and compassion, with spaciousness and tenderness. So basically, cultivating the quality of attention is totally critical to relating to our experience with clarity, but it's a part of the whole. It's not the whole thing. And I think that's where it can get misunderstood as the whole thing. It is one part of the whole. It is one of the 8 limbs here, one of the 8 elements of our eightfold path. So we have, the 3 limbs of practice, one of them's on attention, the 3 limbs of ethics, and our 2 limbs of wisdom. And that brings together the eightfold path, our guidance for practice. And then when we add that to our initial teachings of embracing all of life, letting go of reactivity, and beholding the ceasing of reactivity, that as a whole gives us an outline to shift our way of being toward what we consider an appropriate response to life. So that's kind of the whole big picture. Any questions before I keep going about what I've said about concentration?
Sorry, I don't know how clear I'm going to be while I'm driving, but it just sounds like, why even try concentration?
Right. So as someone who's done a bunch of it, Annie, just because I know your background. So first of all, because our minds are wandering half the time. And when our minds wander, we tend to be unhappy. So it gives us the skill to place our mind where we want to when it's when it's kind of a mess. So that's super helpful. And then it also gives us this underlying understanding that our mind is a positive phenomenon, which I think most people, I don't know what most people think of their minds, but I know a lot of people who want to meditate and sort of come to me to talk about it, they say that their minds are causing them trouble. So to know that actually your mind is amazingly spacious and peaceful and calm by nature is a pretty cool thing to know. And then that maybe makes you feel a little bit different about the way you move through the world and your potential to sort of be the way you want to be. And of course, it highlights our difficulties, although those were probably already being shown to us in mindfulness, but they can highlight them a little more.
I really feel like that was such a nice explanation. I wish my teacher had. I love the thought of the positive side of it. I never thought of it that way, but it is. You have this lovely, like, peaceful moment. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's
That
you,
was amazing. Yeah.
right? The peaceful moment didn't come from another experience or a substance or another person doing what you wanted them to. That's what's so interesting about this is we are looking outside of us to get everything we want when it turns out we're made of what we want. just wallowing in it isn't the same as living. But, and then the other thing that I had forgotten to say about the benefits, and then I've already spaced it, but it was something I already, that traditionally it was used to engage in insight practices. And it's very hard to do these traditional insight practices without concentration. And that's true. I was going to say that's only Mahayana Buddhism, but that's not true. It's true for most of the paths of Buddhism, that the goal is actually insight practices. If you're going to really do this. Okay, so now I'm going to contradict myself. But so for most current traditions, I feel like the goal is doing these insight practices. And in order to do the insight practices, you have to be able to concentrate. So that's what they were originally for. All the things I'm saying are just what I think is nice about them. However, there are other traditions who argue you only need momentary concentration, just to be clear, in case you ever get super into this stuff. So maybe you just need a split second of concentration. That's arguable and debated all the time, how much you need. The tradition I trained in said the deeper the concentration, the deeper the insight. But I trained in the most practice-oriented tradition, which is of Tibetan Buddhism, which is why I started meditating on a 30-day silent retreat. I mean, that was their thing. And at the same time, because now I've said that, I also want to stress that the Buddha said, this is a course on the original teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha said mindfulness will take you all the way. And I don't disagree with that. So even though I was trained first in insight practices and concentration and didn't do mindfulness till later, I have no problem with the Buddha's statement that mindfulness will take you all the way, because ultimately you can have these insights, but you then have to go back and clean up your life. And the cleaning up your life is a very long, and I mean, not so your life, but your actions and your sort of the way you move through the world. And that can only be done with mindfulness, from what I can tell. And that's the whole rest of your life. So whether or not you've had these initial insights or they happen later, you can't get around mindfulness. And if you want to, enjoy your life more and be more pleasant to be around, and that, probably mindfulness is enough. And anyway, that's what the Buddha said, and that's what this course is on. So if
I
you're
feel
going
like
to
it's so true.
say it again, sorry.
I feel like that's very true. I feel like I've gotten more out of the last few weeks of mindfulness than, what is it, 5 years of concentration, which maybe helped me get here. That's lovely. I love the path, but like, it's been so interesting. But anyway, cool.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say before you said it, is that I don't doubt that 5 years of focusing on a mantra didn't help you find, this practice much easier to do, so, and lots of other benefits along the way. Any other comments or thoughts? Questions? So I'm going to read you one of my favorite stories, which I consider a description about how to approach the long-term growth process effectively, whether it's mindfulness or concentration or working on, any habits or reactivity that you have, that this is my favorite description about how to do it, how to approach it, what the attitude can be. So this is from the Dharma book called Frog and Toad Are Friends. And it's called The Garden. So Frog was in his garden. Toad came walking by. "What a fine garden you have, Frog," he said. "Yes," said Frog, "it is very nice, but it was hard work." "I wish I had a garden," said Toad. "Here are some flower seeds. Plant them in the ground," said Frog, "and soon you will have a garden." "How soon?" asked Toad. "Quite soon," said Frog. So Toad ran home and he planted the flower seeds. "Now seeds," said Toad, "start growing." Toad walked up and down a few times. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head close to the ground and said loudly, "Now seeds, start growing." Toad looked at the ground again. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head very close to the ground and shouted, "Now seeds, start growing." Frog came running up the path. What is all this noise? He asked. My seeds will not grow, said Toad. You're shouting too much, said Frog. Those poor seeds are afraid to grow. My seeds are afraid to grow? Asked Toad. Of course, said Frog. Leave them alone for a few days. Let the sun shine on them. Let the rain fall on them. Soon your seeds will start to grow. That night, Toad looked out his window. Drat, said Toad, my seeds have not started to grow. They must be afraid of the dark. Toad went out to his garden with some candles. I will read the seeds a story, said Toad. Then they will not be afraid. Toad read a long story to his seeds. All the next day, Toad sang songs to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad read poems to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad played music for his seeds. Toad looked at the ground. The seeds still did not start to grow. What shall I do? Cried Toad. These must be the most frightened seeds in the whole world. Then Toad felt very tired and he fell asleep. Toad, Toad, wake up, said Frog. Look at your garden. Toad looked at his garden. Little green plants were coming up out of the ground. At last, shouted Toad, my seeds have stopped being afraid to grow. And now you will have a nice garden too, said Frog. It was very hard work, said Toad. So I think this it's very easy to go through these practices shouting at ourselves, why did you do that again? Or how could you still feel that way? Or, criticizing ourselves instead of, singing ourselves songs and lighting candles and, offering ourselves caring, offering ourselves support and compassion, and also understanding that growth, germination of seeds happens underground in the dark. And that's the only way it happens. So that change can be starting, and it will start before you know it's happening. And then all of a sudden it shows up above ground in your life somewhere. But you can't control when that happens, and you don't know when that happens, but it's happening. And it's happening all along. So anyway, that's my advice about how to approach it. Should we do a little concentration practice together? And you don't concentrate too hard while you're driving. Go off the road or something.
I just got home, so I can start.
Oh, perfect. So we'll begin, as always, by bringing the mind into the body. We'll arrange the body to be comfortable with a tall and energized spine. And we want to be able to feel relaxed in this position. So there's a kind of alertness from the lift of the spine, but no tension. Don't overlift to the point where it makes you feel tight. And we want to relax the face and the shoulders and the belly and anywhere else that you might know that you hold tension. So this is a way of grounding the mind and also setting up the body for a successful practice meaning creating the best physiological sort of setup to support our practice. And then I'd like you to feel the entire body at once, this field of bodily sensations. And we're not trying to catch every sensation, but again, this is about grounding here in the body. So we'll just cultivate a global sense of the body right now as it is. And now let's turn our attention to the sensations of breathing in the body. And this will be our object of meditation for today. So we're going to orient toward the breathing again and again. So at the start, right now, let the belly relax so that the breath can settle into a natural, organic rhythm. And the body chooses the rate of breathing. And we practice kind of getting out of the way. And the best way for me that I find to do that is to just relax the belly. And I really like the breath as an object of meditation because, first of all, it moves. So, when the mind is moving, it's nice to watch something moving. It's also self-adjusting. When you're more steady in your mind, it'll move less. When you're less steady in your mind, it'll move more. So that's helpful because it's like an appropriate object in that way. It's kind of cool. Also, it's very portable. So one of the easiest ways to start to get concentration going is to count the breath. And there are many, many ways to count the breath. So I'm just going to pick the one that I normally do, which is letting the natural inhale happen, let the natural exhale happen, and then count 1. Natural inhale happens, natural exhale happens, count 2, count up to 10, and then restart at 1. So simple counting to 10. The count happens at the end of the exhale. There are so many ways to do this. That's just one, but that's the one we'll do today. If you totally lose count and have no idea what number you're on, no problem. Start again at 1. So you can count as long as you like. Feel free to count for the entire rest of this meditation if you want. And if at some point the counting doesn't feel helpful anymore, which could be now, totally up to you, let it go and simply observe the sensations of breathing. So it's totally up to you, your call. Keep counting, count a little longer, stop counting now, as you like. Either way, observe the sensations of breathing. So it's like we're gathering our mind around the sensations of breathing. We're collecting ourselves, centering ourselves. It's kind of like defragmenting, like a disk defragmenter for your computer. It's like defragmenting the mind, collecting the mind, making it more whole by collecting the attention. If you find your mind somewhere else entirely, simply return the mind to the breathing without criticizing or chastising your mind. Remember Toad's seeds. Don't yell at your mind. It will develop. The mind's more neuroplastic when it's in a positive mental state. Plus, it's more fun. So be gentle, be kind, be friendly with your own mind. And the training is it'll go better, but it's also more pleasant. It's almost the most important thing. Be gentle and kind with your own mind and release any expectations that you have for this session or your mind. So you're on the breath for a while, something happens, you leave, then you realize you come back friendly. You're on the breath for a while. At some point you leave, you realize you've left, you come back friendly. That's the practice of concentration. Don't be concerned about the past or the future. Don't worry about how concentrated you were a minute ago or how it's going to go in a minute. Practice simply working with the present moment. Simply concerned about right now. Turn again and again to the sensations of breathing in the body. And remembering the effort work that we did, don't try too hard. Try easy. Make a relaxed and sustainable effort to observe the breath in the body. So not too tight, not too loose. If you try too hard, you might find yourself feeling restless, irritable. If you don't try hard enough, you might find that you kind of don't know where you are. if you're not sure how to like try harder without tightening the mind, one way is to look for details. It's called investigation. And that can kind of wake up the mind a little without tightening the mind. So allow the mind to feel centered here in the body, collected around the breathing. One breath after another. And I'd like you to, for a moment, notice, how do you feel right now? Like, forget how you think the practice has gone so far or where it should have been. Just how does your mind feel from this, from these minutes of working on your attention? So, any questions, comments, thoughts about that practice? Jennifer?
Just really quick, can you describe the investigation process a little bit more, looking for details, what we're to do?
Yeah. So I can look to see, but in the mindfulness teachings on the that intro to mindfulness course on my website, there's like a day specifically on that. So I can refer to that, but I'm not sure which day. I'm sure it's in the beginning. But basically, like, look for specific sensations. What do you feel around the heart? What do you feel in the upper back? What do you feel in the belly? What do you feel in the lower back? What's the texture of the breath like? Is there a temperature? Does it feel long? Does it feel short? So those are the kind of classic questions you could ask. And then once you've done those, I don't go through a list like that in my own practice. I just look more closely, like what's actually going on, because I find that after doing mindfulness of breathing or concentration a lot, you can get kind of in a, like anything, a little bit of autopilot. And you're like, I'm watching my breath, but like, am I? Am I watching my breath of what's happening now, or am I doing kind of what I always do? So investigation can be like, well, where do I feel it today? And if I do that over the course of the last, 14, 15 years that I've been doing this, like sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I kind of only feel it on my left side. Or like it's kind of doing weirder things than I think it would do. And that's when I know that I've actually really looked. So don't expect, I don't think it would have been like that in the beginning, but I think once you get super attuned, and this is something that you do, you'll be like, wow, like I don't know, my breath's not, doing what you might think it would do. And that's a sign that you're actually really paying attention. But yeah, so just looking for details, subtleties is another way to think of it, if that helps. And there's no right or wrong way, really, whatever helps you to engage. But what you don't want to do is superimpose ideas on what's happening. Because to really concentrate, you want to be looking at what's actually happening. Now that I've said that, Annie's practice with a mantra, that's superimposing. And I've done plenty of visualization concentrations in Tibetan Buddhism, and that's completely superimposing. So there are times when you might superimpose, but for the mindfulness of breathing, I recommend going for the pure raw sensations we talked about yesterday, because then you're really with the present moment, and that is incredibly helpful for these kinds of concentrations.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Anything else come up? And not necessarily just about that meditation, but anything from the last 6 weeks? And if you come up with questions later, just email me. It doesn't have to end here.
I'll mention something. I feel like I talk too much on these, but I've noticed with all sorts of relationships, little things come up. I'm like, oh, they're, whatever, the list of things. And it's almost has made me more forgiving. I don't know. It just comes up, I feel like 8 times a day, and it's so lovely and just awesome. And my whole family has noticed. So it's really, thank you. It's been amazing. It's been a really lovely journey.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Annie just said. It's been a real transformation for me just these last 6 weeks. I've been in a course to be a meditation facilitator with the Engage Mindfulness Institute for a year. And for some reason, this course has just taken me deeper and further and more gently. And it's been a really wonderful experience. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience.
Thank you. Thanks for telling us that. You could have told us that before, but I guess maybe I would have thought of you different. So I kind of like that I didn't know that you had so much background, but it explains you nodded a lot. At times where I was like, she's heard this before. So cool. All right, I have 2 quotes for you, of course. 2 last quotes. So from Mary Oliver, 10 times a day, something happens to me like this. Some strengthening throb of amazement. Some good, sweet, empathetic ping and swell. This is the first, the wildest, and the wisest thing I know, that the soul exists and is built entirely out of attentiveness. And then from Jack Kornfield, you are loving awareness. And then you're given this gift of life. What seeds will you plant? To begin to meditate is really a coming home. To remember, who am I really? What do I want to make of this life? First, can I find a spaciousness of heart and mind that can tolerate human incarnation? You can. Sit like a Buddha, and then it's said in Zen, there are only 2 things. You sit and you sweep the garden. And it doesn't matter how big the garden is. You quiet the mind, you open the heart, you remember that you are loving awareness, that you have this gift of life. And then you get up with the rake and the broom and you go out into the garden of the world and you garden. You plant beautiful seeds. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the comments and thoughts and sharing and attention. It's been lovely.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this very much.
Thank you.